The Bears' potential move to Arlington Heights seems more imminent after the team released new images, along with a statement detailing some of their plans to relocate the historic franchise. Our Chris Tye sat down with an NFL insider for his take on whether or not the Bears will be leaving Chicago and what would be next for the city.
If you were to put a marker down on likelihood, 1 to 100, how likely are the Bears to move to Arlington Heights?
90 plus. The Bears moving to Arlington Heights is their future. They've been looking forward to something like this for decades. Now they can do it. The NFL's economics are such that they can do it. The valuation of the teams have skyrocketed. The revenues that are coming in are significant. The amount of money the NFL itself will put into the project is quite significant. So what they've needed is the site. They now have arguably a perfect site for a long-term solution for the Bears where they can control their own destiny. I fully expect that they will take advantage of it.
These renderings that came out today,
Yep.
What does that represent to you?
As I look at the renderings, that represents the highest, best aspirational goals that the Bears have for the entirety of the site. It probably includes a lot of things that will get scaled down as time goes on. It includes a lot of different uses for the site, some which we'll see and some which we won't. But that's the natural course of real estate development. The developers put out a grandiose plan, which includes everything they could possibly imagine, and over the course of time and the process, it typically gets scaled down. And also, they're looking for public funding for the Nonstadium costs of the project. So that also will play a role as time goes on in what will ultimately be developed on the site.
The use of the word abandon, what does that signal to you?
Well, that signals to me somebody who's not really interested or doesn't expect is able to get a deal done. That's not the kind of language somebody uses when they want to curry favor, when they want to be able to work something out. That's typically, political CYA type language. And that's what we're seeing going on here. She doesn't want this to happen on her watch. By the way, this may not have been her doing. It could have happened under anybody's watch who was in City Hall, but it is on her watch. And so she's trying to protect herself politically. Completely understandable, also not helpful.
What is the future of Soldier Field if this is in the 90 percentile as you forecast?
Soldier Field could revert to what it always was, which was more of a public assembly facility, more for things that were beneficial to the community, events that could take place there without having a single anchor tenant that has a big investment, needs to take a lot of money out of the building. Certainly we've seen that it's now being used more for the Chicago Fire. We may see more soccer matches, more high school football games, college football games that taking place, more concerts, more public assembly events that could take place. That's what the building was originally built for. It was not built originally, certainly not for the Bears. The first 50 years, the Bears were playing at Wrigley Field. So this is, it could revert back to that, and the whole campus can be transformed into something that is used more on a year-round basis. But they need to, the political side needs to understand the Bears are almost certainly going to Arlington Heights. All they can do is try and play spoilers in some of the public funding requests that the Bears will likely make to the state and the county. That's not really helpful to the area. And the Bears aren't abandoning Chicago if they go to Arlington Heights. They're just saying they're moving their stadium to a suburban location. We have 10 teams in the NFL that have the moniker of the city but don't play in their games in the city in which it's done. That's almost a third of the teams. So that language isn't helpful, and it's not accurate.
I don't hear you talk anything about a second NFL team coming to Chicago.
I would not expect there to be a second NFL team coming to Chicago for a variety of reasons. It's not that Chicago couldn't support it. Of course it could. But teams relocate when they have the certainty of a new publicly funded stadium, and all of the uncertainties and all the negativity is taken care of by the local political officials. If that was something in the offing, Chicago and the state of Illinois should have been doing it for the Bears, because it's much more likely to keep the team that you've got than to attract another team with all the competitive aspects out there.
Two final questions. Obviously, the McCaskies don't have the pockets that a lot of ownership outfits do. Who is going to pay for the vast majority of this proposal out in Arlington Heights and to pay off what's still owed to the Soldier Field renovations?
I think it needs to be looked at in two different developments. One is the stadium itself. The other is the other development that they've talked about. If the Bears follow certain patterns that other teams have done, they'll bring on a development partner for the non-stadium development, and maybe also for construction development matters related to the stadium. But the stadium financing itself is likely to be a combination of the NFL, personal seat licenses of some kind, long-term contracts, which will then result in financing against the contractually obligated income from things like naming rights, suites, club seats, sponsorships, and the like. The Bears have other teams in the NFL's examples to look to. So they're not plowing the field for themselves. They're now actually following a well-traveled pattern, and they know how they can do it within a certain dollar amount. There's a very strong market for NFL football. So corporations, individuals, and Bears fans are likely to pay up, not just because it's the Bears, but because they're going to get a lot more for their money in a new stadium.
And for the taxpayers of Arlington Heights, what should they be looking for here?
Well, that's a different story. The likelihood is there are going to be a lot of additional taxes created. So one could see that there could be a tax increment financing program put together, not taking any money away from existing tax sources, but rather tapping a portion of the new taxes that are created that could go into things like infrastructure, parks, public lands, water, sewer, power, things of that nature that could have a broader use in the area.
Last question, and you brought up the PSLs. What is the protocol for fans in those other cities where there's been a plow that's already plowed the field? How has that worked for fans that have PSLs in, Las Vegas doesn't work because they didn't have a team before, but in Dallas, if you had a PSL at the old Cowboys Stadium, did it grandfather into you, or does that follow? Does it all start fresh? How does that work?
Legally, it all starts fresh. On a business basis, you need to generate, you can't just simply take what was paid 25 years ago and say that covers you in the new stadium. But teams that have, that are really fan-centric will provide some advantage for the existing PSL holders, seat license holders. Whether that be they get a first crack, whether that be they get a discount. And the good thing about that, even if it doesn't generate the totality of the money that could otherwise be generated if everything was brand new, it will provide you with a base of sales before you've gone out to the open market, which then makes the rest of the seating that much more attractive and that much more scarce. So that's the direction I would expect the Bears to go.
What am I not asking you about this story that's important to get out there?
You're not asking me why they put so many ifs.
Go ahead.
The release that came out from the Bears today has quite a few sentences that start with the word if, and it's in italics, so they want people to recognize it is an if the project goes forward, if the additional development is done, if they buy the land that they're under contract to potentially purchase. That tells me a few things. First, the McCaskey family is a conservative, prudent, risk-averse group. That's one thing, so they're not getting too far out ahead of their skis. The second thing it tells me is that they're going to make a number of the development aspects of the project dependent on public sector funding, some form or another. So they need to put it out so that it's not a done deal, because they don't have the money to back up a done deal within the family itself, and that they're going to be looking to some public sector assistance, which will then trigger some portions of the project itself.
For the non-stadium?
For the non-stadium, correct.
Because the stadium would be built off of the dollars from all those things you ticked off a few moments ago.
Correct.
Corporate partnerships, naming rights, that sort of thing.
Now, they also have to offset some of the cost of the land, which is, a very significant cost here, closing in on $300 million, which is not typically a cost that most teams have to absorb when they build their own stadium. it's usually built on existing public land or land that the public puts together. And the infrastructure, roads and things like that, is also typically either exists or is enhanced by the public sector itself as well. So that's an additional cost, which it seems obvious they're trying to offset through the ancillary development project.
Given that there's a train track right down the block, that there's already a footprint with so much land in a relatively inner ring suburb, so to speak, is this a pretty perfect match in terms of NFL teams on the move?
The Bears could not have put a pin on a map anywhere in the area that would be more perfect than where Arlington Park is. It is used to handling tens of thousands of people coming every day. It has mass transit that takes you right to downtown Chicago, takes you to the south suburbs as well. It has a major infrastructure road program right there with an interchange, literally right there. I suppose it could be built near O'Hare Airport. That might be the only more perfect spot. But this is about as drop-dead perfect a site as the Bears could possibly have hoped to find for their fan base, much of which comes from the northern suburbs rather than the south suburbs, to be able to build their new stadium.
And so the percentage of likelihood you'd put it at?
Over 90%.
Mark, thank you.